Good Lord. Media Matters goes on to explain more of what Roberts writes in this book that has been, again, yanked from publication, but they found it. To no one's surprise, the topics echo themes outlined in the 900-page Project 2025 mandate. There's the extreme anti-abortion rhetoric, a slamming of funding for public schools, attacks on unions, attacks on access to contraception. As much as Trump and Vance repeat their Project 2025 doesn't speak for me defense, their connection to the man and everything in his plan is undeniable and inescapable. Just take Vance's own words in the book's foreword. He refers to Roberts' ideas as, quote, an essential weapon in the fights that lay ahead. And like Roberts' revolutionary rhetoric, Vance calls for readers to, quote, circle the wagons and load the muskets, end quote. NBC News has not yet reviewed the book. We have asked the publisher for an advance copy of our own. In addition, we reached out to Roberts. We reached out to the Heritage Foundation and the book's publisher for a statement. The ties between the GOP presidential ticket and Project 2025 is where we start the hour once again with the president of Media Matters for America, Angelo Carasone, and professor of history at NYU and author of Strong Men, Mussolini to the Present, Ruth Ben-Ghiat. Angelo, take me through the book.
I think that I was sort of one thing that always sticks out to me since we sort of went through the copy, and it's this one part in the book, and it'll sound familiar because it explains part maybe why Vance was so willing to write the foreword, where Roberts writes about the fact that he doesn't believe and argues that having a child should not, quote, be an optional individual decision. And what he argues for is that it's a societal. We have to not only use sort of soft means like pressures, but they should do everything possible from a policy perspective to take away that choice from individuals. That means banning contraception. That means taking a whole suite of issues against reproductive health and banning abortions. That is a massive overhaul. And to me, one through line throughout the book, whether he's railing against education or he's arguing for rolling back unions and eliminating them and rolling back workplace safety protections, or even when he goes into this massive tangent about dog parks, which is he's sort of angry about the fact that there are more people that have dogs than children, which again, not entirely true. That feels like one of the through lines, which is that fundamentally, if you just read it and you let it absorb, you're left with this idea that there's a bunch of childless people out there that are destroying the country, and that something really drastic is needed, and that is a theme that we've heard throughout Project 2025 and Roberts in order to stop them from ruining the country. And that, to me, is the big takeaway. There's lots of little policy and narrative weaved in, but I just can't escape that one narrative because it seems to be the one that connects all the dots. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of random musings from this guy.
Angelo, can you hear me? I lost you there at the end.
Yes, I can. I hear you. Okay. I was saying otherwise, that's the one thing that connects the dots.
Let me read from the book, because it is precious that we actually have the book itself. And if we take all of our time doing that, it'll be an incredible service. Okay, so this is that section on IVF. Once you understand this pattern, individual choice masking cultural upheaval, you will see it everywhere. In vitro fertilization, IVF seems to assist fertility, but has the added effect of incentivizing women to delay trying to start a family, often leading to added problems when the time comes. This was the first time I understood their demented assault on IVF. It isn't just taking away a choice and what for a lot of families is a miracle. It's taking away the optionality of choosing the time when you start a family. But what offends them about IVF is that a woman would pursue a career and postpone having a family using the miracle science of IVF.
Yeah, I mean, it gets back to this idea about control. And in a way, it's part of it is that he's reasserting control over women's bodies. And that's a through line that we've seen through some of the policies. It's just now they're becoming much more explicit about what the intention is. And they just don't like the idea that people have any control over over when to have a child, in particular women. And you'd think that he would want IVF, right? Because part of the book, part of the storyline is that there's not enough children, there's not enough people having family, but it just goes to show you what the book is really about and what their philosophy and theory is really about, which is control. And that ties into the sort of the authoritarian bedrock that a lot of what the book is about and Project 2025 and what Roberts is advocating for is really built upon.
And here's the section that Roberts writes about childless society. Quote, "That's a problem because a childless society becomes decadent and nostalgic. Aging, barren societies literally become consumptive, taking on higher levels of debt and depleting savings as they pay foreign workers to keep things going. They become less and less capable of innovation, a young person's game, and more stuck and decrepit every year. Getting married and having kids, on the other hand, gives you skin in the game for the future of your country. It forces you to grow up, give up childish things, and live in the real world. It grounds you, gives you a sense of purpose in life, and helps generate community, gratitude, and joy. A culture of children is a culture of hope." Again, if you close your eyes, that could be J.D. Vance talking in any one of the hundreds and hundreds of interviews and podcasts he did before he was tapped. Angelo.
Yeah, and I'll just to bookend that because it ties in with the example that I referenced before about the dog parks, because he describes this dog park in Washington, D.C., and he's really mad about it. He's angry. And his whole theory about the dog park is if you go to this, it's not just the size that he's mad about. It's the fact that he describes these people there that are angry and unhappy and miserable. He sort of paints this sort of very bleak picture of childless people gathering around this very large dog park. And he blames sort of Democrats and public policy for even allowing for such a facility to be built in order to accommodate these really depressing, sort of depressed, angry people. And to me, that's the illustration you're left with based off the description you just described, is that he takes that sort of policy narrative and then he starts to put it into practice. And he basically makes it seem that anyone that doesn't have a kid is miserable. And not only are they miserable, but they're hurting everybody else as a result of it. And I think, when I go back to what J.D. Vance wrote in his foreword, he calls the book the essential blueprint for the future. He is adopting a lot of this philosophy wholesale, and I think it sort of ties into why Roberts, in the intro clip that you played, was so excited to see him as the VP pick, because Vance is an avatar for not just Dawn's Early Light and what's expressed there, that narrative, but the entire policy structure of Project 2025.
Ruth, this is the dog park reporting. On page 69, Roberts rails against the Swampoodle Dog Park in Washington, D.C. for having too much room for dogs to play and not enough for children, blaming this on the anti-family culture shaping legislation, regulation, and enforcement throughout our sprawling government. I spent time in Republican politics. This is so extreme and so radical and so bizarre. It doesn't have its tentacles in anything remotely familiar to me. This hatred for childless women or women who want any control over when and if they have kids. And clearly the hatred for men or women who have dogs is so pathological. I want to understand its role in moving America toward an authoritarian state.
May I say that these far-right extremists seem to have a problem with animals, between the governor of South Dakota shooting an animal and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. with the bear cub, thinking he could have a dead bear cub and finding it would be a fun joke. And this. But actually, what I take away from the dog park thing, it's very scary because all of this discussion we've had, authoritarianism is about lifting regulations and rules for the very rich, for the elites, through privatization, deregulation. So more rights, more freedoms for them, and fewer rights and more controls for everybody else. And so this obsession with childlessness, and it goes back, as Angelo said, to the idea that women would have choice, that women have autonomy over their bodies, over their destiny, the timing of their families, who's in their family, who they marry. All of that is part of a war on women. By the way, it's also very fascist, especially if you link it to the kind of great replacement of white Christian births thing. And Mussolini, some of the language we've heard, it reminds me of Mussolini, who in the late 20s, he said, He was obsessed with these things too. And he said, the cemeteries are full and the cradles are empty in Italy. And he had a whole program, no contraception, no abortion. Also, Vance talks about penalizing people who don't. It's not just that they're bad people. You should actually, as Angela said, use policy to penalize people who won't have kids. And so not only was there extreme controls under fascism on women's autonomy and taking away reproductive rights, but there was a tax on bachelors imposed on in the late 1930s to punish men as well, in the interest of growing the family and having more white Christian babies. So although this is a blueprint for the future, it's a blueprint that echoes the fascist past.
Ruth, let me play again J.D. Vance's attack on women who make the choice not to have kids or families.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. And how does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it?
Because it's so outrageous and offensive, every time I've seen it before today and before reading these sections from the book, I've had sort of an emotional reaction. But when you lay a political lens over it, it's catastrophic for the Trump-Vance ticket. I mean, Trump was tied to Project 2025 because all of his people made it and run it. But in terms of what he projects to his own voters, it's so promiscuous that Trump could have tap danced away from it, at least in the eyes of some of his base. I'm guessing, maybe not, but he would have tried to. But by doubling down on the walking, talking embodiment of the hatred toward childless women, the intolerance for marriage equality, the authoritarianism that drips off every page, and then writing the foreword for the book that the guy that makes it, Trump is now attached to this in a way that you can't walk away from politically. And I wonder, Ruth, the First Amendment protects the right to say all these things, right, and to write it and someone to publish it, and that's fine. But everything else is up to the electorate. And what is sort of the political response to extremism like this?
Well, first of all, these people don't want to be liked. They want to be feared. And in a way, when Trump says we don't need the votes, often what extremists do is that they know that the reason they need to consolidate power and eventually make elections into a hollow shell without much meaning is that they know that they're extremists. Population hating, women hating, gay hating things are unpopular, but they don't, so they can't rely on the popular vote anymore because they would lose. So the GOP is locked in this thing where it's become so extremist, it's distanced itself from the desires and aspirations and actual principles of many Americans. And thus, they have to be on this course to seize power at any cost. And Roberts is part of this, and so is Vance. And the original title of the book was Burning Down Washington. And, Roberts may have a CEO